Every country on Earth is in debt. The United States owes over $38 trillion, the highest figure in its history. The European Union carries around $14 trillion, Japan nearly $9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia and export powerhouses like China and Germany owe enormous sums. But here's the paradox. If everyone owes money, who exactly is owed? This is the financial lens, where money, power, and history intersect, and where nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Debt isn't just a burden, it's the architecture of the modern world. Every war, every boom, every crisis rests upon an invisible framework of IOUs. Follow those IOUs long enough and you find something unsettling. The world doesn't owe money to anyone in particular. It owes it to itself. But that doesn't mean everyone benefits equally. To understand how we arrived here, a planet drowning in more than $315 trillion of total debt, almost 3 times the size of the global economy, we need to go back to the beginning. Before Wall Street, before digital money, before banks became governments in disguise. We need to go back to war. The year was 1694. England was fighting France and running out of gold. Desperate for funds, the king turned to the merchant class. In exchange for a steady stream of future interest payments, backed by taxes that didn't yet exist, they financed the crown. And in that moment, the Bank of England was born. It was revolutionary. For the first time, a government could spend money it didn't yet have. And in return, lenders received something priceless, a promise from the state. A promise that could be traded, bought, or sold. That was the birth of the government bond, the foundation of modern finance. France copied it, the Netherlands refined it, and the newly independent United States adopted it to fund its revolution and its expansion westward. Debt became not a sign of weakness, but a mark of credibility. The ability to borrow was the ability to rule. Empires once conquered land to take gold. Now they issued bonds to collect interest. The battlefield became the balance sheet. 3 centuries later, debt has become the world's most powerful export. The United States owes $38 trillion, Japan over $9 trillion, and every 100 days, the world borrows another $1 trillion. Every country owes, every bank lends, and every citizen, through taxes, savings, and pensions, is both debtor and creditor. But who holds the other end of this rope? Let's start with the United States, because its debt isn't just national, it's global. Out of that $38 trillion, roughly half is publicly held, owed to investors, not to other government branches. 2/3 of those investors are American: banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining third, around $9 trillion, sits in foreign hands. Japan holds about $1 trillion, China around $800 billion, then the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people say America is in debt to China, it's true. But only for about 2% of the total. Most of what America owes, it owes to itself. The Treasury issues bonds. Banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve buys them back, creating new dollars in the process. Americans pay taxes that fund interest on those bonds, and that interest flows back into American retirement accounts. It's a circular mirror. The debt is real, but the creditor is mostly a reflection of the same system. And that circularity isn't unique to America. It's global. Japan lends to the US through treasuries. The US lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. And developing nations lend back by storing their reserves in Western bonds. It's a global game of hot potato. Every country holds someone else's IOU. Every promise is backed by another promise. It's like a poker table where every player borrows chips from the next. And the only rule keeping the game alive is that nobody stands up. Behind every government bond is a web of institutions, hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks, managing tens of trillions in assets. They are the true arbiters of credit. They decide who can borrow cheaply and who must pay a premium to survive. When they lose confidence, currencies collapse, governments fall. Entire economies can be rewritten overnight. Democracy decides who governs. Markets decide who survives. At the center of it all sit the central banks. They don't just manage debt, they manufacture it. Every time the Federal Reserve or European Central Bank buys government bonds, it creates new money. The liability of one balance sheet becomes the asset of another. Every dollar in circulation represents a unit of debt somewhere else. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Every coin, every bill, every digital dollar carries an invisible IOU on its surface. For decades, this loop has survived on confidence. As long as investors believe governments will pay interest, even if never the principal, the machine keeps turning. But when confidence falters, the illusion shatters. We've seen it before. Greece, 2010, debt unpayable, bondholders panic, yields spike. The European Central Bank and IMF intervene, but the rescue comes with pain. Austerity, unemployment, and despair. In Argentina, Repeated defaults turned debt into a national curse. In Sri Lanka, fuel shortages and political collapse followed when the government ran out of foreign currency to service its loans. When the system cracks, the creditors step into view. The IMF, the rating agencies, the anonymous bondholders who hold entire nations by the throat. And yet, even after collapse, the same logic restarts. New loans replace the old debts are restructured. The machine resets, a new name on the same balance sheet. Because in the 21st century, debt isn't designed to be repaid, it's designed to be rolled over. Governments issue new bonds to pay off old ones. Economists call it refinancing. Interest becomes the real product, the rent charged for stability. And the global economy now depends on that rent, like a shark that must keep swimming to breathe. The United States will never clear its $38 trillion. Japan's debt has exceeded 250% of GDP for years, and yet its bond yields remain near zero. Investors aren't waiting for repayment, they're waiting to renew the deal. Because for investors, government debt is the safest collateral in existence. A U.S. Treasury bond isn't seen as a liability. It's an asset, the foundation of global finance. Pension funds hold it. Banks use it as security. Central banks treat it as money. The system depends on governments never paying off their debt. Because if they did, the world would lose its most trusted financial instrument. Imagine if Washington decided to repay every dollar. Banks and funds would lose their most stable asset. The dollar supply would shrink, deflation would follow, markets would collapse. Paying off the debt would destroy the very thing that makes the economy function. So governments do the opposite. They issue more, not recklessly, but rhythmically. Debt becomes a heartbeat for capitalism itself, pulsing through every pension, mortgage, and market on Earth. That's why when politicians talk about balancing the budget or paying down the debt, they're selling an illusion. The goal isn't to eliminate debt. It's to keep it sustainable, serviceable, and believable enough that the system never stops trusting itself. Because once belief fades, the numbers stop mattering. Confidence collapses, interest rates spike, and the economy built entirely on rolling promises grinds to a halt. That's the real secret of sovereign debt. The plan was never to pay it back. The plan is to keep the world believing it will. It's a closed loop of trust, and as long as that trust holds, the numbers can stretch indefinitely. But trust isn't equally shared. When we say we owe it to ourselves, that's only half true. Interest doesn't flow evenly through society. It flows upward, from taxpayers and workers to institutions and investors. Debt isn't just a transfer between countries. It's a transfer between classes. That's why global inequality and global indebtedness rise together. The system rewards those who own debt and punishes those who pay it. It's the same story repeated across every level, from households to nations, from nations to the entire planet. Creditors aren't villains. Debtors aren't victims. They're two sides of the same machine. The problem begins when that machine runs out of fuel, when new borrowing can't keep pace with the promises made before. That's when the question, who's the creditor, stops being abstract and starts being personal. Because at the top of this pyramid, there isn't one face to blame. It isn't China. It isn't Wall Street. It isn't the IMF. It's all of them. And all of us. The modern financial system has turned debt itself into money. Governments issue it. Banks multiply it. Investors trade it. And citizens depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor has blurred beyond recognition. Debt once meant bondage. Today, it means balance. But if that balance ever tips, if confidence breaks, the illusion ends, and we'll remember what debt truly is. A promise that can't be kept forever. If this gave you a new perspective, take a moment to share it. And if you want clarity, in a world built on illusion, subscribe to The Financial Lens. Because every view, every comment, and every share helps bring light to how the system really works.